Welcome to Surviving the Black Church podcast, where we shed light and bring awareness to religious trauma and dismantle oppressive systems within the Black church.
On this week's episode of Surviving the Black Church podcast, Jonathon, Hugh, and Nikki embark on a journey of navigating through a very monumental topic within our community: mental health stigma and the Black church. This topic is so vast and so needed within our communities that the crew took a shot at covering some important themes that are necessary when discussing the state of our mental health. All the info shared in this episode is so relevant that we decided to keep it as a whole episode. It is our longest episode to date. We encourage you to pause and reflect as much as possible as you navigate through this challenging topic with us. It is also our hope that within this episode, this would be encouraging to many within our community to take action to improve the quality of their own mental health. So please join us now for this important discussion: mental health stigma and the Black church.
The Surviving the Black Church podcast represents the views and opinions of Jonathon Carrington, Nikki G, Hugh Kelly, and their guests to the show. The content here should not be taken as clinical advice. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establishes a therapist-client relationship. The content here is for informational purposes only. And because each person is unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any clinical questions.
Hello, this is Jonathon, and you are listening to the Surviving the Black Church podcast. I am now joined by my co-hosts, Nikki G and Hugh.
Hey everyone.
Hey y'all, how you doing?
All right, so we are back for another episode, and I wanted this episode is going to be about mental health stigma in African American religious communities. And I just wanted to first, I know we've been doing a lot of different types of episodes on a variety of different content. So I just wanted to first start off this episode by just, we're going to share a little bit about our backgrounds, our professional backgrounds, just to kind of give you guys a little bit more insight into our professional life. And so I'll start. I am a psychotherapist in private practice. I practice in Maryland and Virginia. What I do is I specialize in the areas of trauma and how it impacts relationships. So I work primarily with African American clients, many of which suffer from mental health conditions such as anxiety, depression, and PTSD, among many other co-occurring disorders. So also my clinical and research interests are in the areas of racial trauma, religious trauma, and relational trauma. So I research, I write, consult, I write on topics related to mental health of Black folks. And I also have my own lived experiences that I bring to my work as someone who has experienced these type of traumas. And so that's kind of a little bit about me. And I'll have my co-hosts talk about a little bit about their professional backgrounds, just to give you some insight into their working lives. Who would like to go next?
Okay. I'm Nikki G, and I'm a certified trauma recovery coach. I work with clients who've experienced religious trauma, cult involvement, as well as narcissistic abuse, both in relationship dynamics, romantic, friendship, things of that nature, and especially in their family of origin. But I'm also a survivor of religious trauma. I'm a survivor, a multi-cult involvement survivor, and a narc family survivor as well. So it's not just something that I do as far as work. This is something that I've experienced. And just as Jonathan had alluded about his profession, I support those who have experienced this, but I'm also in my place of learning and healing and growing. And I know that I'll probably do that till I take my last breath, and that's okay. And so while I'm recovering, I'm still researching, I coach, I speak, and I love one of my most favorite things to do is lead support groups to connect with survivors, to meet them where they are after they have experienced these insidious types of abuse. So, we're just not sitting here speaking from something that we see as a hot topic, perhaps on social media, but this is real to us. These are hallways of trauma that we've walked through or still walking through. But we have found enough resilience and purpose and light in our life to help light the hallway for others who might find themselves in the same situation. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll pass it on to Hugh.
Hey, y'all. My name is Hugh. Y'all know me. Um, Professionally, I'm a crisis counselor. I do a lot of different things professionally, but that is one of the hats that I wear. I'm a crisis counselor, and I help people through whatever it is they might be experiencing that has led them to, having calling up the crisis text line. So yeah, that's one of the things that I do professionally. It's something that I feel a great deal of passion to do. It's something that I've used in the past, not necessarily with the place that I'm at now, but in the past when I was in college, when I had thought I had nowhere to go and no one to lean on, I have called up a crisis hotline, and I was able to get through even just the hour that I was, had this incredible psychological strife that I was experiencing. And so it's something it's a way, I don't know, I think it's one of the things where I'm like, I want to get back to it. So I'm doing it now. Um, and so, yes, I'm also a survivor of narcissistic abuse. I'm also a survivor of adverse church experiences. I grew up in the Black church. From 0 to 18, I spent all of my childhood going to these churches and not understanding that what was going on, and that anything was even abusive. So yeah, that's one of the I'm also a writer. I have a tiny press that I'm founding, that I founded, that will be fully up and launched in the summer. And so that is, I write a lot about these topics on mental health, and I try to find new ways to explore um, you know, you know, achieving optimal psychological health. So yeah, that's just a little about me.
Great. Thank you so much. You guys have amazing backgrounds. Like, I appreciate y'all doing those intros. Yeah, and I think it's just important for us to kind of talk about that because, especially before we get into the episode about mental health stigma in the Black community and or African American religious communities, is because we're coming from a lot of different diverse perspectives and diverse views, particularly in the area of mental health. And we want to be able to give you all just a variety of different perspectives on this particular topic area. And what I would like to do next is I would like to ask my fellow co-host, and I'll answer as well, a discussion question for us to ponder on about mental health stigma. And I would like to know, how has the presence of mental health stigma impacted your journey, your personal journey towards healing and seeking support? Who would like to go first on that question?
Well, how did it impact? I can just say
Yeah.
flat out, I stayed in abusive churches a whole lot longer than I
Mhm.
should have because I did not see it as abuse. I thought I was suffering for Christ like a good soldier. So why would I leave? Why would I look for resources to help me through something that I didn't think I was going through? I mean, I
Yeah.
looked at abuse more as an attack of the enemy, and the enemy trying to establish enmity between myself and the leadership. And that's why I was having so many issues, because I was called of God and they were called of God. And we were called to work side by side with the anointing that was on our lives. So surely this is not something to look at as abuse. So why would I think mental health? Why would I think there was something that was wrong? I didn't consider myself dealing with PTSD at the moment. I didn't consider myself having a lot of anxiety and paranoia when I was going through all this. So if I didn't even think that way, I definitely wasn't going to avail myself of any resources to help me, let alone resources that the church has deemed demonic or evil or not of God. So,
Mhm.
had the church been more supportive and integrated faith and prayer and God and mental health help outside of the church, I might not have sat in the abuse as long as I did. So that is one of the main ways I can say that it has impacted me and affected me, and generationally as well. This is not just me. This is my mama, my daddy, my grandmama, my grandpapa, um, who I'm pretty sure we'll touch on that later, how it affects different parts of our generational line. I believe even though we're going to talk about stigmas and everything like that, I think this generation is a little bit more open than previous generations within the Black church. So
Mhm.
I'm really happy about that. But unfortunately, we have to kind of walk this walk alone, because sometimes grandma and mom or dad doesn't really understand. We'll get into that a
Yeah.
little bit more, but just in a simple form, that is how it affected me. And I'm so glad now that I'm been able to avail myself of these resources, because it has been a tremendous help for my mental health, my emotional health, and my recovery overall. So I'll just leave it right there.
Yeah. I personally, I'm gonna be honest, and I appreciate you answering, Nikki. Before I became a therapist and before I got into the mental health world, I honestly did not have any type of understanding of mental health. I thought that mental health, people who had mental health issues were crazy. And I know that's a negative word, but that's how and I'm sure that people probably are listening, that's been the perception, that it's for crazy people, it's for people who have severe issues. I also believe that I didn't need it. And I didn't even correlate mental health issues with anything related to me, especially when I was in the church. I thought it was something that was like, I was always like projecting it onto other people. I was always saying it was not me, like that struggled with mental health, or that I was, so I was very in terms of mental health stigma, I stigmatize other people and their mental health challenges. And I also participated, have to admit, have to be honest with myself. I participated in the stigmatization of people who had mental health illnesses. And it wasn't until I went to school and started realizing that, wow, like I could see myself in some of the literature. I could see myself in some of the experiences that I was having, particularly with the church that I was involved in, and how a lot of the information that was um, happening, a lot of the experiences that were happening, I was experiencing it for myself. So with research and education and um, more information, I was beginning to kind of come away from the stigma and start kind of having a little bit more compassion and empathy for other people, but more importantly, myself. Um, because stigma can really take you away from yourself. It really can, because it can cause you to live a lie. and you think that you're okay, you think that you're together, but you're not okay. Actually, most people are not.
Let's
And
be
so
honest.
let's just be honest about it. And so, like, mental
Mm-hmm.
health stigma, as it has impacted my healing journey, it's in the beginning it did, and over time, I have learned so much about mental health, and I don't see it as a bad thing anymore. I see it as amazing. Just to know and understand and get clarity on one's mental health, and to have that information at your fingertips, it's helpful, so it can improve your thinking, it can improve your behavior, it can improve the quality of your relationships. It can just allow you to see more clearly, especially if you're being abused or neglected or treated badly. um, it allow you to see, oh, okay, that's what's happening. Okay, you can identify and be able to discern better. And so that's how I would feel. I mean, that's what I think. Like, for me, mental health stigma has impacted my life. So, what about you, Hugh?
Yeah, mental health stigma, it's so because I guess we all have very unique experiences, but I actually have been going to therapists since I was a child. Since it's been something that has been present in my life for as long as that I can remember, and it's been present in many different ways. And the stigma for me, like I remember when I was in middle school, I was I was very shy, very introverted. I was a very bullied child, and so I would really keep to myself. And I never really, I'm sharing the story. I'm writing about it. I'm trying to write it, but now I'm sharing it out loud. But when I was in middle school, I was kicked out of school for a month. So I don't, the day when the guy, the shooter at the Virginia Tech occurred, I think I was in eighth grade. And, I was a very shy child. I rarely talked in class. And I was very bullied. So I just really didn't want to open up. And I remember the English teacher asked me, what are your thoughts on this? And I said something to the effect of, I wonder why he shot and killed all those people. And I was actually kicked out of school for about a month because of this. I had like therapists. I had no idea why this was happening. Like I had therapists coming and you know, doing evaluations of me. And, the school was trying to see if I was crazy or not, to see if I should be let back in school. And so, and then went to a different therapist after that. And so it was such a bizarre thing for me that I could never really figure out like why it even happened. It was so bizarre. Um, but from that, like I had a child psychologist that afterwards, which was somewhat helpful, but it helped me get through school. But and I was eventually allowed back in school about a month later. But I was out of school for a month, and I have a perspective of like I kind of developed a mistrust of authority figures of therapists then. And in my college I went to therapists as well. And so, and that's when I started to see the really healing impacts of therapy, like how it could be, you can really heal in it. And especially the last few years, I've been like really, really grateful to find really tremendous therapists. So that have really helped me in my healing journey, that have really helped me make sense of my lived experience, um, of my own subjective lived experience. And so, my own hyper specific subjective limited experience that really helped me make sense of it. So my stigma, like my experience with stigmatization of mental health is so like, I mean, it was so forbidden in the church as well. Like I grew up in the church, and going like psychiatry was like the talk of crazy people. It was so forbidden, it was so. And so I have so many different kind of things that occurred that really kind of contributed to me not necessarily trusting therapy. And once I was able to kind of reestablish that trust, um, in therapy and mental health over the past few years, it has been such a tremendous, it has changed my life for the better. And so I have the stigmatization of mental health. You can't even bring up mental health without somebody saying, "Oh, that's for crazy people," like Jonathan just said. And it's really important for all of us to be able to kind of come to grips with our own psychological health and well-being, and being able to kind of confront all of these things. And so I love that we're having this conversation today, because it's going to be really interesting to uncover the many different ways that we can kind of move forward on our own mental health journeys, through many different modalities, and how what's going to best impact us. So I know that's a little bit of it's a complicated story, but I believe all of our stories are complicated. So, and I just hope that we can kind of, reflect on our, nuanced and very hyper specific journeys, and to be able to not stigmatize mental health, to be able to understand the tool and function of our well-being that it is. And so, yeah, that's really what I wanted to say.
Thanks so much, Hugh. And I hope the audience is able to see what we just did there, because it just reminds us that no one is exempt from stigma. Okay, like, it doesn't matter if you are a mental health professional or a coach or a therapist or a layperson. We all have had some type of stigma. And so I'm glad that we all were able to share that and really ground ourselves into the reality that stigma has been the lie that we have internalized and that we have grown to believe and accept as true. And so people might be asking, what is stigma? What is stigma? So let me give you the definition of when we say the word stigma, what it is that we're talking about, because we're talking about negative attitudes, negative beliefs, negative stereotypes that society hold towards certain individuals or groups based on their characteristics or circumstances. So when you think about stigmatized individuals, they are subjected to discrimination, social exclusion, devaluation, which can really lead to further marginalization and adverse outcomes. Stigma can arise in a lot of different factors, from various factors such as your race, your ethnicity, your gender, your sexual orientation. Stigma can be come from mental health conditions, substance use disorders, among others. So the word stigma actually came from Greece, and it referred to like a mark or a brand that was used to signify something negative or disgraceful. So in the context of human social behavior and attitudes, stigma can be traced to that and to the work of Goffman, or Irving Goffman, who wrote the book about stigma. And he talked about how individuals who possess stigmatized characteristics or identities like physical disabilities or mental illnesses, certain racial ethnic backgrounds, face some type of societal disapproval, discrimination, and their negative stereotypes. And so when we talk about, because this podcast is about the Black church, there are cultural and religious beliefs that can play a role in the beginning origin of a stigma. So some cultural or religious teaching may associate certain conditions, certain behaviors or identities with, I believe someone was talking about like weakness, moral failings, impurity, divine punishment, which can further lead to more and more stigmatization of individuals who possess those type of attributes. And I think it's important for us to know and realize that stigma is a social construct, just as racism is a social construct, and it's not inherent in that stigmatized individual or group. Some other examples of stigmatizing and beliefs and attitudes when it comes to mental health might be, like I said, believing that mental illness is a sign of a personal failing or weakness. It's almost believing that, like, if I believe that people who suffer from mental health conditions somehow are to blame for their struggles, or that they should overcome their difficulties through their own willpower alone. That's a very stigmatizing belief and attitude. Another thing might be associating mental illness with violence or dangerous behavior, as we've seen in the media in terms of certain types of portrayals of particular stereotyped individuals. They may link mental illness to violent behavior, despite evidence that individuals who have mental health conditions are more likely to be victims of violence rather than the perpetrator. Some other examples may be assuming that mental health is a sign of incompetence. Some type of attitude around stigmatization may be like, if I were to reach out to a mental health professional, that's a sign of inadequacy or an inability to handle life challenges on my own. There are some people, they're in the church, who believe that mental health conditions are not real. They're not real illnesses, and they will identify mental health illness as attention-seeking behavior, a personal weakness. They will dismiss any type of science or evidence of biological, psychological, societal, social factors that contribute to that mental health challenge. People may use derogatory language or slurs to describe individuals with mental health conditions. The use of words, language, terms that reinforce negative stereotypes can be dehumanizing. And they can dehumanize individuals who have a mental health condition, which can further contribute to more stigmatization. Like we both identify, you and Hugh, people who believe that mental health conditions are crazy or that they're dangerous, which perpetuates more fear and discrimination, and discourages people from seeking out help. And some people believe that mental health conditions are rare and uncommon. That's another misconception that can lead to isolation and alienation and a lack of understanding. When people feel like they are the only person that are suffering from that particular difficulty. So there's all these different types of ways that mental health conditions can be stigmatized. And so that's just like a basic understanding of stigma when it comes to how we understand mental health. So do any of you have any thoughts or anything you wanted to add to the ways in which we stigmatize mental health before I move forward?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
yeah.
Go
I was
ahead.
just gonna. I was just gonna say, like, the way we don't. Something you said where you was like mental health is, or excuse me, health ailments or illnesses is rare. That and I say this a lot. I think it's a way that's another way that mental health gets stigmatized. It's a very isolating thing that occurs. And I think if we really took inventory on ourselves, it's just kind of like going to the dentist. If your teeth get rotten, excuse me, if you don't go to the dentist, your teeth will get rotten, right? So if you don't go to, seek treatment for your mental health, whether you think you have an issue or not, your brain is going to get rotten. And so your thinking is going to get rotten. Your experiences are going to be rotten, going to get rotten. It doesn't matter. You need to kind of take that inventory about the totality of your own health. And so, and I feel like if you were really painfully honest with yourself about the awful truth of things that you might not want to acknowledge, you would be able to, you would see the need for it in your life. So, I think it's like mental health ailments are not at all rare, like, this commonly believed in this culture that we live in. And I think that's also led to the way that people don't take their mental health seriously. Especially in the United States, it's very, very, it's not something that's health is not really taken seriously. Mental health is not taken seriously. You'll see in other parts of the world, like Europe, Africa, other parts of the world, it's a lot more of a priority. And so, I think, I just wanted to say that really quickly.
Yeah, appreciate that.
I don't know where we go with this. I don't know where we go with this flow, but I don't think what you just shared should be rushed, because there are so many gems within how you showed and discussed some of the stigmas that we have regarding mental health. And this is humanity in general, but then even more so what it looks like, within the Black church. And especially the one when you talked about the belief that mental health conditions are merely a matter of personal weakness or attention-seeking behavior. The bigger one for me, dismissing scientific evidence or biological, psychological, things of that nature. And there is a stigma, since we're talking about the Black church, within the Black church, that science is anti-God, medication anti-God. There's so many things that we don't even realize that we believe and hold dear, for many because it hasn't hit us personally, maybe that we know of. And so we have all of these stigmas and are not even aware of it. And I'm saying this as someone who had to realize that my own self. There are layers to the stigma. And if we can actually be honest with ourselves, and I think the past few episodes we talked about being able to see and to confront, talked about coping mechanisms, to sit with this episode and actually allow it to scan how we've been thinking, and a lot of times it's not conscious. But it reminds me with that one, with people, mental health conditions are not real. And people that have them, they're just weak, or they're not spirit filled, or they're not, in God enough. They're not praying enough. They're not fasting enough. And for them to even think about reaching outside of the church, it is like, excuse me, why would you do that? And I think about this story back in 2020. Aside from all the COVID issues that was abound in our world, I was going through probably one of the most very dangerous seasons of my life physically. And, I was having a lot of health issues and health challenges, trying to maintain homeostasis within my body, a lot of issues with my blood clotting, a whole lot of very scary stuff. And I remember during 2020, it was the height of the pandemic. It got so bad that they had even cancel elective surgeries for people that really needed it. And I really needed surgery at that point. Had people praying for me, was looking up to God myself, but I still needed surgery. And so, long story short, I was able to have the surgery later on in 2020. And it was a high risk surgery because of all of the issues I had. But graciously, I was able to come out of that. And I saw blessings along the way from my creator to help assist me to get me through that season. But guess what, y'all? God did not come down on, a white horse and come and wave a magic wand and I got better. That's not how I recovered. And I remember when I was after the surgery, post-op, and I remember being on social media, and one of friends of mine, he's a minister now, but he was pontificating on social media about how science is anti-God. And if you have to rely on science, if you have to rely on things outside of the church, then your faith is not where it needs to be. And so, me just coming out of what I just came out of, I cracked my knuckles and I start to typing because I was like, and I think he was shocked because, usually he wasn't used to that type of boldness, if you will. But I said, sir, so the surgery I just had, the technology that just allowed me to continue with my life, the medication that helped me to make sure my blood did not clot. So all of that is anti-God. Oh, no, well, I didn't mean it like that. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Because on one hand, I will hear people say stuff like that, but you are still using your phone. That's still science. That's technology. You are still using a stove to cook. You're still driving a car. All of it is science. We just pick and choose what we want to use to demonize, to actually be prideful about where our relationship is with God and judge others, if we're going to be honest. But before you move on, these are some questions I want to pose, just even off of that stigma, to the church, to the Black church. Do you believe that the only place where you can get healing and recovery from any ailment, particularly in the mental health issue, is within the four walls of the church? And you can only get it through spiritual, ethereal means, only through the use of worship and prayer and fasting and laying on hands and someone prophesying over you and reading the word and being in worship. That's the only way that you can get healing and recovery from the ailments that you have. Do you believe that? Do you believe that God can actually have other means of provision of healing and recovery outside of the church? Do you believe anything secular, scientific, or what a lot of people deem to be man-made cannot be used by God to heal? Do we just whisk it away? Do we feel that all mental health professionals are demonized and they don't know what they're doing and they're just doing that to confuse you and you shouldn't rely on that? Do we believe, let's evaluate what we think. Do we think that taking certain medications to help us be mentally stable is anti-God? And for a lot of us, we may be thinking that and not even aware. And because mental health issues on an alarming rate has not tapped on our door or affected us personally, we may not realize that we're walking around with some of these stigmas. And it's unfortunate because there is recovery and there is help available, not only to identify what's been going on. You talked about that earlier, Jonathan, to being able to name it, to identify, to acknowledge, but then finding holistic and therapeutic ways of getting through and treating these disorders. But if we don't even acknowledge that that is possible outside of the four walls of the church, then the stigma continues to perpetuate. So these are just some questions to leave with us. And again, this is not from a place of judgment. At one point, I believe the only place I could get healing and recovery was in the church, and that was it. And I suffered, and I stayed in abuse, and I stayed with a lot of disorders, anxiety disorders, PTSD, complex PTSD. And all I thought I needed was prayer, fasting, some oil on my forehead, laying out on the floor in the church, and I would be fine. And years later, I wasn't. It wasn't until, like you said, Jonathan, in your experience, wasn't until you went to school and you start becoming educated. You started learning and you start identifying some things within your own self and said, wait a minute now. Whoa, what? I didn't know this. And then you were in a place then to start to heal and start to recover, even though you were in for schooling. And so I just want to throw that out there because you gave a lot of different types of stigmas that we are probably not even conscious of. And that one for me, the whole science thing, it ruffles feathers for me because science is all around us. So don't pick
Yeah.
and choose. If we're gonna be anti-science, then you might have to go in the desert butt naked. Sorry for the visual, but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
when you're eating and you cooked a meal, that was scientific. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on what you just said with that education piece, because I know in my experience, education was not. I remember somebody saying it. I don't know if it was the pastor or not, and they were like, they said something like, "Oh, there's so many saints, or there's so many people that went off to school and got them a little bit of education, and they feel like they're so knowledgeable and so aware of things, and you know when God should be your only source of education and information." And I was just like, I felt like that was very I feel like that statement was a bit, it was definitely a projection, but I was just like, I don't even think that is even true, because I don't think you can. I think it's with anything in life, like when you're overly reliant upon something, it's never a good thing. Like it's like there. I mean, even nature will reveal that to you. There's balance in everything, and so I think that what you were saying in your story, Nikki, was this sense of like, well, I can affirm and validate that faith and spirituality can provide a sense of support and comfort for people. But when you are overemphasizing on faith and spirituality alone, and you're viewing that to be the solution to all things, even mental health challenges that you're dealing with, like I feel like it undermines the value of seeking out professional guidance. It undermines the importance of accessing appropriate resources and therapy. It undermines the evidence-based treatments that are available for people who are really struggling with a body-based issue. And it's not just about mental health. It could be anything, a physical ailment that you're experiencing. And so I think that the perspectives and the approaches when it comes to spirituality and faith has its place. Well, on the other hand, just in speaking to the balanced perspective of it all, mental health professionals also have a perspective that can be valuable as well, in terms of the psychological, the biological, the social perspectives and approaches that can really help a person really deal with some of the medical or even clinical issues that they might be facing. And so I just want to note that people who have spiritual views or religious views on their particular faith or their spirituality, it is not just in your face. There's diversity in terms of what people believe in terms of different communities. There's diversity of opinions and views, and even in the mental health communities. So while there are people who find value and comfort in integrating their faith into their mental health journey, there are other people who might have some concerns about potential harms or neglect of receiving necessary care. So, and then there's people who want to adopt more of a collaborative approach to their care and want to have different types of perspectives and approaches and views to come in to address what it is that they are experiencing. And so I think having that sense of collaboration with different types of professionals, different type of people, can offer more of a balanced approach than a very like myopic or narrowed approach, which, not everything in life is black or white, right? It's like there's some gray, it's not either or, black or white, this or that. It's just some things need more perspectives, and I think we're all unique. And so I just wanted to mention that when you were telling that story, like, we all have differing opinions and different views and different perspectives that all have some level of value. Not one has more value than the other, right? But I also wanted to mention too that there is a consequence to relying solely on spiritual approaches without incorporating the appropriate mental health care. And I wanted to kind of go into those implications, because if you are a person who's listening or you know of a person who is relying overly reliant on faith, spirituality, and spiritual approaches, and you're not getting the appropriate mental health care or the appropriate health care that you need, it can lead to inadequate treatment. So you can be having mental health disorders like anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress that require specialized interventions, specialized therapies that need to be applied to that underlie the psychological and physiological aspects of that particular disorder. So if you're not getting professional treatment for that, it's delaying your process, and you're not going to be able to get the support and tools that you need in order to manage that condition. So it's going to affect all the different areas of your life. Another thing that, what can happen here is that, mental health conditions can worsen over time if left untreated.
Come on.
Or if they're ineffective or inappropriate, interventions that are being used to support you. So if you are a person who is relying solely on spirituality and faith, you are worsening your symptoms and you're complicating and exacerbating some of the symptoms that you're experiencing, with your mental health condition. Mental health treatment does require you to have a holistic approach. It typically takes that's considering the psychological, the biological, the social, even the spiritual. And so if you're only relying just on the spiritual, there are going to be things that you're going to be missing, important aspects of your care, such as therapy, medication, psychosocial support, and you may be overlooking or dismissing those things. Another implication might be you may be struggling with a mental health issue, and then you say to yourself, you direct the reason, you provide an explanation. You say something like, well, the reason why I'm dealing with this particular condition is because karma, or, I'm going through this because God has, or the devil is taking me through this, or God is testing me in this situation in my life. So what you're doing is you're trying to provide a spiritual reason or explanation or rationale as to why you're experiencing that. And that can lead you to have feelings of guilt, spiritual guilt, spiritual shame, and spiritual inadequacy. And that is, we call it a spiritual disturbance that can happen, where it can exacerbate the psychological distress that you're experiencing, but also hinder your willingness to seek appropriate help, which is part of the stigma. So I think that—
Can I add to that?
Go ahead, Nikki. Yeah, I just wanted to—
There's some more, because we want to really make it plain. I mean, you started some of the things that we say, like we talked about the coping mechanisms. We don't want to deal with some of the things that may be coming up. And so it's very easy to spiritually bypass, which is what Jonathon is saying. And, a lot of popular terms in the Black church, if someone says, hey, sister so-and-so, I've been having some nightmares, keep having flashbacks when I'm driving to work, I'm having a lot of trouble sleeping, I feel annoyed all the time. Like I'm just not myself. I'm panicky, I'm paranoid a lot, and the person responds, well, honey, that's nothing but, like you said, that's nothing but the enemy. You need to cry out to God, because God alone can fix your issue. Yeah, but sister so-and-so, a friend of mine had told me about, a mental health professional that they're seeing, and they were able to help them with some of their struggles. I think I might reach out to that person. Baby, we don't rely on the world. We rely on Christ alone. He is the remedy. But yeah, sister so and so, I'm trying to tell you this is affecting my ability to parent my children. I'm not getting enough sleep. I'm irritable. I can't be intimate with my husband right now because I'm dealing with feelings of shame and low self-worth. Sister, listen to me. You don't have depression. You don't have these mental health issues. You suicide? Yes, sister so and so. Sometimes I feel suicidal thoughts. Honey, that stuff is not real. It's the enemy attacking you. And the Bible says that we are supposed to have on the helmet of salvation, and we're supposed to have the sword of the spirit. You're supposed to be putting on the mind of Christ. You don't need to go to no mental health, whatever you call it. But what if sister so-and-so, what if I may have some issues and I might need some medication for medication? Don't even let the enemy hear that. Don't even give him credibility. Medication for your mind, you have to put when's the last time you prayed? When's the last time you really cried out to God? I know all this stuff on TV. We're in 2023, and this is what people say that's necessary to recover. But I'm gonna tell you, I've been with God for 45 years, and I'm gonna tell you right now, God will fix you. God is all that you need, baby. You just cry out to God. You'll be all right. This is what we do in the Black church. Now, whether we do it because that's all we know, no judgment. Whether we do it because we are ignorant to some of the things that Jonathan and Hugh have been disclosing, whether we do it because that's how we saw our families model it, we've seen it down the generational line, or of some of the other stigmas that Jonathan mentioned, we have to come to grips that this is what we've been doing. And it's not okay for a lot of our family and our loved ones, and especially the adolescents. I'm not going to go off like I did a couple episodes again, because I feel very strongly about the young people. And when they're coming to their family and the church leader to say some of the things I just modeled, they're turned away. They get the oil, they get prayed over, and then they just tell them, don't worry about it. God's going to just take you all the way. And we're not telling people again to not pray. But I don't know the address of the scripture for those who are very scripture knowledgeable with scripture. You may know where the address is, but I recall a scripture in the Bible that says a false balance is an abomination to the Lord. So for those of you that still hold fast to their faith and to the Bible and to the word of God, what do you feel about that scripture? Because what we are talking about requires balance. We're not saying dismiss your spiritual practices, but don't over rely on it to the point that it becomes a detriment and a hindrance to your mental health wellness, especially when you are running a family, especially when there are kids relying on you, especially whether you're single, you don't have a family, but you are needed on this planet. And there are many in the church, whether young, old, that are sitting in the pews with some disorders that need to be talked about, that need to be supported, possibly treated, possibly diagnosed. And I know there's a lot of shame around it. Nikki, I don't want anybody knowing that issues with PTSD. What if my mother finds out that because of the anxiety disorders, I might have to take a little medication. I don't want, my church leader to know that. They may put me out. Balance. I'll just pause right there.
Yeah. Hugh, you've been quiet. Did you have anything? That was powerful, Nikki. Thank you for that share. My goodness.
Yes, thank you. That was a very, very powerful, Nikki. Thank you so much for that share. I just want to say briefly about what you said earlier about, the longer that you give it up to God, the longer that you, in this kind of a sense, the longer that you do not reflect on yourself, the longer you prolong your suffering. It's really that simple, and it's so scary to actually do it. But it's we really can't begin to be able to change if we just can't reflect, and we can't change our own suffering. And so if we can't, reflect on that, so the longer you prolong these things, the worse it gets. And it's so difficult to just say that you have or that you need help with something. It's so difficult to say, I need help. I need help, maybe not just in one source, but I need help. Maybe not just with one, way, but I need just to even say that, and to say, I need help, and I need help, just say it. Just say, I need help. Just say it. I need help. That's all.
Yeah. I need help. I need help. It
It's
is
so hard.
it is a hard thing to say. I mean, even for me, I struggle with asking for help and asking for support. But that's my vulnerability coming forward, but we're all in this together. And it is something. This stigma has, I mean, we as Black people have historical trauma. You have to remember, just remind ourselves of our humanity. We have had intergenerational trauma, historical trauma. And if you have survived, endured adverse religious experiences as a Black person, religious trauma. So we're all surviving these different experiences. And so it's just about being gentle with ourselves and being compassionate as well. The scripture that you were talking about, Nikki, was Proverbs 11:1 about the false balance. And it does talk about that. It talks about it. And for those who are listening, is to refer to that, if that's something that will remind you to have balance. And I think, because I really want to stay here for a little bit longer, because this mental health stigma has so much of a strong influence, and it's overpowering to the point where we don't really know where to draw the line in the sand. Because when you were talking, Nikki, about the situation with like being so convinced that your truth is not true, that is so real. And I think that there is this sense of misunderstanding when it comes to trauma, particularly religious trauma, just not being aware, because even just in the extension of having to explain, right? Having to explain your condition, that you're struggling with a mental health condition, and then you're being invalidated and dismissed in the event that you are explaining to people. And it's like, that's where stigma comes into the room, because in the event that you are disclosing your experiences, you're being minimized and dismissed of your trauma. You're being minimized and dismissed of your mental health condition. You're being, the attribution of your distress is solely to, okay, pray on it, pray to God, go to the Bible, go to this verse, do this practice. And so when you're being told that in the moment of saying, I need help, maybe somebody is listening and they asked the question. Yeah, I did ask that question. I asked for help, but I was shut down. I was discarded in the event of that. That leads to isolating, alienating. I'm gonna be like, you know what? I ain't gonna ask for help. I'm not gonna ask for no more help anymore, because I know pastor or that preacher gonna tell me, oh, they're gonna go to this Bible verse. The Bible says this, the Bible says that. Nobody wants to hear that when they're suffering. Nobody wants to hear that. And so when you've reached that point in the stigmatization of your mental health condition, you can internalize that stigma. And then that leads to self-blame. That leads to you stigmatizing yourself. Well, maybe they're right. Maybe God told them that about me, and he was a mouthpiece of God. He told me that about me, so I should just go to the, and then they're still suffering with the mental health condition, so they don't get anywhere. And then the other thing that you were mentioning, Nikki, about just this internal conflict, this like cognitive dissonance that happens when you're experiencing religious trauma in the church, where if you try to say something that may go against the doctrine or the practice or the leadership, say it's mental health condition, say it's a mental health, okay, I'm struggling with depression or anxiety, or I'm struggling with something, and then it's met with this, it leads to a conflict. You're feeling torn because, okay, I'm dealing with this mental health condition, but at the same time, my pastor or my preacher is telling me that I don't have the condition and I need to go to God about it because it doesn't exist, or, so there's a cognitive dissonance that happens when in that. And so you start to believe in your own lie. You're almost gaslighting yourself at that point.
Yes. Ooh, cool. Hold on.
You are gaslighting yourself because
end up playing yourself.
You're lying to yourself about your own mental health condition because the pastor is working through God, and then God told you not to deal with this. So you said, okay, that's true. And so now you're at a point where you're with yourself, to yourself, lying to yourself. And you're convincing yourself based on the false and misleading information that was told to you, that was projected upon you, that you internalized, that you created in your own mind about what happened, and you propagated that information as true. So now it's with you and it's not with the pastor anymore. So you're deceiving yourself because you've convinced yourself that you don't have anything going on with you. There's nothing wrong, that you are, that you're healed, that you are saved, that you are delivered from this disease, this ailment, this condition. And then that leads to when you, go ahead, Nikki, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You finish it up. Go ahead.
That leads to even more things, because when you're stuck in that place, that you convince yourself and you start believing in your own lies, that leads to this bias, that leads to more dissonance, more disillusionment in yourself. You're almost like misremembering things in your mind. Like, there's a thing in psychology that's called confirmation bias. And because ideally human beings, they seek out information that confirms what they already believe. Go with me here. People who seek out information that confirms their already existing beliefs. So say it's a person that believes that they took the word of their pastor or their preacher, and they said, oh, mental health, you gotta pray on it. You take that, you believe that is true, even though it's a lie. And then you say in your mind, okay, mental health is not, it's not a factor. God got this. You will believe that. And then if somebody comes to you and says, oh, you got some, I'm concerned about you, you need to seek out some support. You'd be like, no, because God got it. All I got to do is pray on it, and God will provide all of my needs. And you will quote every scripture. You will ignore,
justify.
You will dismiss any type of evidence of the mental health condition that you face in the name of God. That's confirmation bias, because you in your mind have convinced yourself that you don't have a problem. So now you're in denial, and that when new information is being presented to you, you're filtering that information, and then that heightens your lie even more. And so anytime someone comes at you, and this is why y'all, it's so hard for a lot of people to ask for help and support, because there are so many people who are lying to themselves. They're in that much deep denial that they have reinforced the lie that they have believed in their mind about themselves, and they have created this echo chamber that supports their distorted beliefs, right? That's what happens in confirmation bias.
And for us as Black people,
trauma is.
For us as Black people, what's something we say? I don't care if you've been in church, outside of church, whatever. What is our famous? Hey, Jonathan, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine.
I'm blessed and highly favored.
Blessed and highly favored.
Yep. Come on.
Yep.
I'm the head and not the tail. And again, we're not trying to belittle or dismiss people's faith.
Language.
But this is the language without the balance. And if you are blessed and you highly favored and you know your mental health status is okay, and you say that, cool. But if you know after you've declared that to 20,000 people throughout the day and you go home and you are suffering in silence, you're really not okay. You're not really fine. You have things that need to be dealt with. And the whole time I'm hearing you talk, I just keep hearing, and I ain't trying to do all that, but I'm just saying there may be somebody out there who has been told when they're going through all these illnesses and issues, and they've been reading articles on choosing therapy and psychology today, and they're like, wait a minute, something's not right. But I was told that prayer is enough. And for some of y'all out there, y'all have been praying, crying, spitting out and calling out to God, and you still are dealing with the same issues. You still are dealing with the insomnia. You're still dealing with the hypervigilance. You're still dealing with the paranoia. You're still dealing with the shame and the guilt. You're still very anxious and you don't know how to regulate yourself. You're dealing with all these things, but like he was talking about the cognitive dissonance and the confirmation bias, but you are told, just pray, you'll be fine. Just pray. But many of you for years have not been fine. And it comes a point where I know your leader said this. I know your church believes that, but it comes a point where it's, what do you believe? Because guess what? Hypothetically, if someone was in the kitchen cooking and they cut themselves and the laceration is pretty deep, you can't take a cloth and hold it down. It's pretty deep. Are you going to sit there and think, well, the pastor said that I should just pray and that's it? Or, let me just do something spiritual. No, we don't wrestle with, most of us don't wrestle with, I probably should go to a higher form of care and pray as I'm going to get the care. When it comes to our natural body, it's not very hard for some of us to say, I'm sick. I at least need to go to the doctor. For some, there's some people that don't even do that. But just humor me for a second. We don't second guess most of the time, and we don't filter through the words of the pastor, the words of the church, the teachings of the church, the words of the church mother through our decision making when it comes to physical ailments. When it comes to physical, if our child got hurt, fell off their bike and got all messed up, we're praying and we're driving them to the emergency room. But when it comes to our psyche, and for many of us, our psyche hasn't been right in a long time. Jonathan talked about the historical trauma we have been through as a people. Being Black and living on this planet, in and of itself, we're dealing with some trauma. Then add religious trauma on top of it. A lot of us are not okay. A lot of us are not fine. But when it comes to our psyche, when it comes to our mental health, we just act like everything is okay. We just put it in the back burner and we just keep on going. And like you said, we lie to ourselves that everything gonna be all right. And I'm not saying it's not, but how is it gonna be all right unless we at least bring attention to it, right? For some of us, going to a mental health professional is like going to the emergency room and getting an ultrasound to find out why we're having stomach pains in our abdomen.
Right.
For some of you, your psyche has been having pain. Your emotional state has been having pain. Your interpersonal relationships, there's a lot of pain and disruption. And we know this, but we allow ourselves to go through a mental health ultrasound to scan and see what is the issue. So then we can choose and find out what's the appropriate modality to establish healing and recovery. But when it comes to what goes on the inside and we don't see it, we are very apt to dismiss, to ignore, to suppress and pretend it's not there. And like we've been saying the past 3 or 4 episodes, we're here to say we don't have to do that anymore as a people. I'm not saying mental health professional is going to wave a wand. When people come into Jonathan's office, he doesn't have a wand and wave it and say, okay, you're good. See you later. Bye. Everything's okay. That's not what we're saying. But can we love ourselves enough to have balance, to hold on to our faith if we choose, and to get that ultrasound done of our psyche by possibly reaching out, like Hugh said, reach out for help. And if somebody tells you pray only, that ain't the person that you need to help support you. I'm going to tell you right now, Sister so-and-so may have been around for 10 years in your life. I ain't saying kick her out, but you might have to go to some other resources to get that help. Or for your own self, for your family's sake, do yourself a solid and get that psychological ultrasound. I'm telling you, you will find yourself moving and recovering and being in a better place than you were if you pretended it didn't exist.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to say really quickly, what if you're not blessed and highly flavored, right? Like, what if you're not privileged? I feel like we live in a culture where we have to think of ourselves as blessed and highly favored and privileged, and that we can never acknowledge our own suffering. We can't even say we're suffering because we're so blessed and highly privileged. We can't even say it.
Come on, Hugh.
We can't even say it. We can't even think about confronting our own pain and misery and suffering because we have to feel like we're better than. And why do we need to do that? So what if you're not? I want to pose that question. What if you're not blessed and highly favored? What if you're not privileged? And what if you get okay with that and really look at yourself for who you are and what you've been through and what you're going through and what needs attention, what needs care, what parts of yourself, that pain doesn't go anywhere. It sticks with you your entire life. It doesn't just magically disappear for it doesn't, you need to confront that. Right. So if we what does it mean to not be blessed and highly favored? What does it mean to not be privileged? Why do we have to think of ourselves as that? And then, not confront.
Go ahead. Why? Because we're so used to wearing that cape. That cape is leading to our self-destruction, y'all. That cape,
come on.
That meaning to be so strong, in the survival instinct that we have in ourselves as Black people, that we have to be strong in the eyes of whiteness. That's why. That answers your question. Why, Hugh? Is because we always have to put on the cape. We need to put down the cape.
Put down that damn cape.
I'm talking for myself. We need to put down the cape because the cape is killing us. It's killing us. It's killing us. Yep. It has nothing to do with the thing about it, it has nothing to do with your belief system. I think it's past that point. It's not even that. But the belief system, that the belief system is harmful because it's reinforcing the false sense of power, the false sense of strength that is non-existent. It's a lie, y'all. It's a lie. It only perpetuates. That's the most powerful weapon that is formed against us.
Whoa! Sorry, y'all.
I know. Nothing but a damn lie.
I know.
And the thing that y'all are saying, I'm just thinking about this now. Even the belief system that I am blessed and highly favored, like Hugh was saying, and that privilege and elitism that it emanates off of us. Then if a mental health illness starts to arise, we don't believe it because I'm too blessed and highly favored. God ain't gonna let that happen to me. The devil is a liar. I know I don't have PTSD. I know I'm not dealing with depression. I rebuke that and I'm gonna keep going. The devil is a liar. I ain't gonna be up in no psychiatrist's office. I am blessed and I am the head and not the tail. God is too good. He is not going to allow me to go there. That's for them other people down the road. hmm That's for them other people that are weak in faith and don't know their God. Because my God supplies all of everything I need. My God got me. And so that elitism is another coping. We just cut off the reality of, baby, clinically, you're depressed, honey. Clinically, you got some anxiety issues that you're dealing with. Clinically, I know we want to talk about that. Clinically, you might be dealing with some religious OCD, and we're going to go deep into that. There's a whole lot of mental health disorders that we are not permitted to go into because of the sake of time. But, that elitism and pride will cause us to believe, God ain't going to do this. Or, okay, God, I got depression. This is just a test. You tested Job. You tested me. All right. I am not going to fail you, God. I'm going to pray every day. I'm going to pull out my scriptures. I'm going to pull up all the scriptures on the mind. I'm just going to repeat them over and over again. And I'm going to speak those things that be not as though they were. And I don't got no depression. I don't care what they say in the office. That guy don't know me. You're my God. You got me. This is all the stuff we say. And I ain't saying there's no relevance to those scriptures I'm quoting. But where is the balance, y'all?
Yeah.
Where's the balance? So, sorry. Y'all
but
got
it's
me
just
wrong.
like, what I really want to say is just like, who are you fooling? Like, who are you fooling? I know.
Nobody.
I know that you've had to be so strong and you've had to do things in your life to protect that strength. I get it. And I know, because I know people listening to this, may thinking like, this is all I know. This is all I've known is to be strong, is to be the strong one, to be the sanctified, to be all these things. But who are you fooling? You're not fooling anybody except for yourself.
Your damn self. Oh my God.
That's what it is. You're fooling yourself. Woo. You're lying to yourself, and it's delaying. This is not even like a God thing. This is just a you thing. And so at what point do you look at yourself in the mirror and you start seeing the truth of what is happening? That's why when I talk to clients in sessions, I'm just like, I don't really care. I say this. I say, I don't care what's happening to you in the world, in the public world, and who you are, what your title is. I want to see you for you. I want to see you as yourself, because there's going to come a point in time that you begin to meet the you that you've never met before.
Woo.
The you that you've never met before, because you've been hiding. You've been protecting behind an image. You've been managing an image in the world in order to survive. Statement.
Oh my God.
I know that Black people have been stereotyped. And I talk about stereotypes. I talk about the negative stereotypes and the biases and the type of schemas, as I say, the structures that we have had to be. We have to be the strong Black woman, the strong Black man. We have to be these strong, resilient beings.
Oh no,
we're not allowed to just be human, because we're disrupting the stereotype of being portrayed in society as dangerous, as violent, as unpredictable, as weak. So we're having to assume these roles in the church. We're assuming these roles of respectability politics to be civilized and polite and wound up and powerful and all these different things. These are all stereotypes. And this is all it's doing is projecting our fragmented selves to the world. It's not helping us to be better beings, better humans.
Yes.
By assuming these roles, it's only making us worse. We're perpetuating some of the same traumas of our past. These are the things that we did in the past. I think we vacillate There is I'll talk a little bit about the mental health conditions, but there is the indigenous, there's some indigenous researchers that have talked about this idea of called the way in which we deal with ourselves, like in terms of understanding historical trauma. We have a tendency to transposition ourselves, which is this vacillation between the past and the present, because we don't know how to stay present, because we're going back and forth between the past and the present, in dealing with our historical trauma and dealing with our oppression. So it's like we go from being blessed and highly favored, we're going to talk about the Black church, to inherently sinful and flawed, to that being blessed and highly favored, but going back to the old versions of ourselves. It's just like this, we don't get a chance to just be, just to relax in our humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And these stereotypes, these racial stereotypes, lead to diagnosis of mental health conditions, because what it is about control.
Mm-hmm.
Mental health disorders come out of control. Okay. So when we don't talk about it, when we don't deal with it, we are trying to control an image. We're trying to control being perceived as something other than. And so I want to talk about some of these mental health conditions that affect Black individuals, that can have, that come out of the historical stigmatization, that comes out of the structural inequities, that comes out of the stigmas, that comes out of the stereotypes. Depression. Depression is one of the most common mental health disorders that affects every community, but particularly African Americans. And we have depression because of historical trauma. We have depression of systemic racism, social economic disparities, stigma. It affects our mood, the way we operate in the world. But we mask it. We mask it with the stereotypes, because that's what our defense mechanism. That's how we mask it in certain roles that we adopt in the church. Anxiety disorders. Anxiety is generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, social anxiety disorders. Those are observed as well within African Americans. We have to call it a thing. Experiences of people have experiences of racial discrimination, societal stressors. You can't avoid it. Can't avoid it. Heightened levels of anxiety. That means that worry, you stress all the time. That's anxiety disorder. PTSD, post-traumatic stress. African Americans actually experience higher rates of trauma exposure because of our historical trauma, because of systemic racism, because of the ongoing, ever current racial injustices that are happening in the world. That's increasing the risk of developing PTSD. Substance use. When you think about the use of substances to cope with emotional pain, the stress, the trauma, social influences, all of that is a substance use disorder. SUD is a mental health disorder. And I think, Nikki, you talked about some of the other ones, like, scrupulosity. We don't want to get too much into that, but there is some behaviors of scrupulosity, OCD, in terms of this obsessive compulsive it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with this over-reliance and overemphasis of faith and religion, of just having to really just having compulsive behaviors, of be over-obsessed with like certain scriptures or certain types of teachings, and making sure you set rituals in order to please God, but it's really a way to cope with something else that's going on inside of you, but you're engaging in some of these type of behaviors. But there's so many different types of mental health disorders that come out of that control, of needing to stay in control. And at some point, we have to release our attachment to that and get real with ourselves, and really get real with the fact that this is what we are experiencing. There was a book, just to add further understanding of the cultural mistrust, because I know that people are like, well, I don't have it. I still don't believe I have it. I don't trust the medical system. Well, it makes sense. It's understandable. And coming from a place of empathy, there was a book that was written by Jonathon in the 60s and 70s that explained how African-American men that were involved in civil rights activism and the expression of political dissent were often diagnosed with schizophrenia or dementia praecox or protest psychosis, as they called it. So what they did was they used this diagnostic label to pathologize and stigmatize individuals who challenged existing social and political structures. And this diagnosis of schizophrenia was also a way to marginalize and discredit individuals who engaged in civil rights movements. And so if you are a Black person who may have grown up in the 60s and 70s and refuse to acknowledge, it could be understandable because it can often be labeled as what Dr. Metzl was talking about in his book, because you can have that cultural mistrust and that stigma because you're looking at the mental health system like, oh, I'm afraid they're gonna diagnose me as something or say that I have something because I'm coming to them about my problems. I don't know if I can share or disclose some of the stuff that I have experienced, which can lead to, I ain't gonna go to them. I'm just gonna not say anything. I'm not gonna put my information on record. All of these things are in the thinking process of reaching out and asking for help that I wanted to make sure that we validate and acknowledge, because these things are real. But this is the conundrum that we face in making sure, in getting people connected, because there is a history of historical trauma when it comes to mental health treatment. There is a history when it comes to psychiatric diagnosis being influenced by cultural bias and political agendas and power dynamics within society. There is a challenge with connecting people with mental health services because people have this feeling of like, if I go to this clinician that may not look like me, that may not share my identity, are they going to tell? Are they going to report this information? Are they going to bring this information to the open? Or are they going to express a sense of confidentiality with the information? Mm-hmm. And if you're in the intersectionality, you could be Black and LGBTQ, or Black and have disability, or Black and be in a double marginalized group. It compounds even more challenges with accessing mental health care and support. So we have to approach this differently than how we would approach any other population or any other group, because the population in which we are trying to serve, many of you may be listening to this, may have some of these fears, may have some of these anxieties, may have some of these questions about interacting with the mental health system, about interacting with these systems. So how can we develop ways and interventions that are trauma-informed, that are looking at the whole person versus the symptom or the disease, that are not just expecting people to just reach out to a therapist? No, who is in their network? Meeting people where they are and providing supports and interventions where people are, versus, because I feel like right now we have a lot of energy around getting people into mental health services and getting people seen, and people, it's so much energy around that. But what I find that there's a lack of attention with understanding why people are not reaching out, understanding why people are not connecting, understanding why, because it's completely understandable, because if you look at the history, mm-hmm. it makes mm-hmm. sense why mm-hmm. people are not reaching out. It makes sense why people are not connecting. So we have to come up mm-hmm. with a different way to make sure that we're increasing the access to services, rather than imposing this kind of idea that, oh, there is no such thing as racism, there's no such thing as trauma, there's no such thing as abuse, mm-hmm. there's no such thing as this, mm-hmm. no such. that's one of the problems. So I'm going to pause there and just let that breathe a little bit. I know I said a lot there. Any thoughts?
Oh, sorry.
Yes, I'm just like taking so much in. And I, as I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, there's a mistrust. And how do we, and not do we, but like, how can we put that, I don't want to say like, how can we mend the trust with the trust that's been broken with us, against us? I'm just trying to figure out, how do we even think about moving forward knowing this, and how do we how do we how do we heal ourselves, how do we get the healing that we need, and how do we take action, and how do we take action? That's it. That's what I'm just like, how do we, I don't even want an answer. I don't even want to know how we take action. I want us to figure out how we take action for ourselves. And so I don't even want the answer, but I want to do it, if that makes sense, which it doesn't. But, I want to be able to move forward in that uncertainty, and to be able to reach out for help, knowing with what we know now after tonight.
Yeah. Seeking action, seeking answers. Yeah, that's a difficult question, actually. What do you think about that, Nikki? Or anything what I was sharing, or what's on your mind? You've been quiet.
Well, because I've been taking it in too.
Okay.
There's what I think is, to that, and I don't even have the answer either, Hugh. So I feel you with that. But just what comes up for me, there is personal action that we as individuals, outside of systems, outside of family of origin, outside of, stereotypes and societal norms, for us, what do we do? How do we take action? And again, I know that many attendees and congregants of the Black church, there is so much teaching that's admonished about the connection between the leader and the parishioners, and how oftentimes it's very codependent. So if the leader within a Black church is not talking about mental health as a resource in addition to prayer, the leader is not encouraging members to seek out such things, oftentimes the members, because they are so interconnected, and there's not oftentimes in some Black churches a lot of agency and individualization, many people on a personal level still have a hard time broaching this topic, even if they're dealing with issues themselves. So you have that aspect, and to that, I would really encourage people from 3 or 4 episodes back, even unto now, how learning to have your own agency within whatever faith your faith is, but particularly Christianity, particularly in the Black church, that people are not so codependent that if they never hear it from the pulpit, then that means it doesn't exist and it's not a resource.
Right.
But then that's for people. So if you are dealing with a lot of mental health issues, or things have been coming up, conversations today is like, woo, and hear us out. We're not trying to bring this topic up to say, hey, that means there's something wrong with all of us. Like, that's not what we're saying at all. We are not trying to make people think that, look, you got to go and get a diagnosis because something. That's not what we're saying here. No. Again, balance. If we could give a theme, it would be balance, to hold both and look at both and research both sides, the spirituality and the natural part of our psyche and what it needs for recovery, right? So I'm encouraging people to take ownership yourself. Don't wait for the pastor to preach about it. Don't wait for the prophet to pull you out of the congregation and say, thus saith the Lord. That therapist that you've been looking at on Psychology Today for 2 weeks, God says, yes, go. He gives you grace and permission to go and connect with that therapist. It's not going to happen like that, y'all. So
Yeah.
you have to take inventory and take responsibility of your own being, and then walk through some of these stigmas that you've connected when you didn't even realize it. After this episode, I know we're pouring out, but I'm going to revisit this for myself, right? So
Yeah.
that's personal. But then to the institution of the Black church. Okay. Looking at the leadership, it starts with the leaders. So if it starts with the leaders and your congregation and your parishioners are looking to you, as the Bible talks about shepherds feeding their flock and feeding their sheep, you have a responsibility to not demonize mental health necessity, to not demonize the resources. You have a responsibility as a leader who wants to care and feed your sheep and the flock that you are supporting and stewarding, to encourage them to pray and go look for a therapist, to pray and read some books on mental health, to pray and listen to resources like Surviving the Black Church podcast. I'll just throw that in there for safe measures. But you want to encourage the people. You want to strengthen them. You don't want them to feel stigmatized because of how your issues are with mental health. You need to sit with yourself and your maker, and you need to wrestle through this stuff so that you are able to lead the people that you serve, right? But here's the kicker, y'all. A lot of times, many leaders are not doing this within churches, let alone Black churches. They're leery of doing this because if folks start working through their traumas, okay, if folks go to a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and they start talking about their family of origin and how that's connected to where they're at in the church, and they start seeing some things, like Jonathan said, it's about control, baby. They're gonna start saying, now wait a minute. That's what Pastor did. That's what you're describing, Mr. Therapist. And the leader does not want to lose a dominance and control and the major influential voice in that person's life. Therefore, it is very easy to encourage your flock not to go that way, which is very scary, which is why I don't care what religion, what form of spirituality, I don't care where you are in the planet, come back home to you. Come back to your agency, and let's come out of these codependent relationships that we have with leaders and celebrities. And I don't care what the spectrum, political, religious, spiritual, they are mere men. And we have a responsibility for our own being, our own temples. And so Black church looking to how do we start to deal with this? So for the leaders, you want to really help your people? You want to see your people grow and thrive and recover? I'm going to throw this out there. I'm going to admonish you. Let God's people go. Release them. Allow them to seek the resources that they need to help themselves, to live a healthier life, spirit, soul, and body. Don't hoard the parishioners and have them codependent only on your words, but release them to go. And you know what? Let me just say this. As I was doing research and preparing for this podcast, I was actually pleasantly encouraged. I see there are some Black churches that are broaching this topic. I saw a lot of seminars and webinars on different social media platforms where Black churches are starting to do the work. I love this, okay? I love that this is happening. So it's like, so how can Black churches partner with mental health professionals and start inviting some of them to speak at church events? Have a church events on mental health awareness. They can invite mental health professionals, workshops, seminars, provide education and resources. You are starting to chisel at the stigma. You can host mental health screenings or clinics where people can actually feel right up in the church. Wouldn't that be talking about balance? Wouldn't that be beautiful? where
Mm-hmm.
individuals can receive free or low-cost assessments and referrals for mental health services right then and there. And there are some Black churches that are doing that. So we would be
Yeah.
remiss if we did not acknowledge that we know some of this work is happening, but on a
Mm-hmm.
total scale, this is why we still have to address it,
Mm-hmm.
incorporate some of the mental health services into church programming.
Yeah.
Actually have messages that you can find within the Bible that talk about our psyche, that talk about our mental state. And include the adolescents. Y'all know I'm gonna throw that in there every time I can. Include the young folks, because let me tell you, they are
Yeah.
dealing with so much more than I did. And then my mom and my grandpa, they are dealing with so much. Include them, honor them, hear them when they say, hey, I'm struggling. And
Yeah.
again, you can be a liaison between, referrals and mental health professionals, the people, and the church. And you are
Yeah.
showing the church that, hey, we care about you, spirit, soul, and body. These are just some of the things that the churches can do to start partnering with the mental health community,
Yeah.
and not just saying prayer is enough, because for
Right.
many, and the more serious mental disorders that we have not even discussed on this episode, prayer
Right.
is not just enough. And y'all can try to throw
Mm-hmm.
tomatoes at me for saying that, but when people are dealing with schizophrenia, bipolar disorders, and things of
Mm-hmm.
that nature,
Yeah.
especially originating from historical trauma, intersectionality of religious trauma, baby,
Yeah.
prayer is not enough. So that ain't the
Yeah.
totality of the answer that you might asking for, because I'm just, these are just Nikki's thoughts, but I
I
figure
think
I'll
this
throw
is
that
good,
out there for
Nikki.
you.
Yeah, this is good.
Mm-hmm,
Hugh, did
mm-hmm.
you have something or to respond to that, or I was gonna jump in?
No, I am absorbing all of it. That was very powerful, Nikki.
Yeah, very much so. I appreciate y'all. But I wanted to just for clarification though, when you were talking about the codependence, if for those who have never heard that word, codependence is basically an experience where it's an individualized experience where you are displacing your own needs for the needs of others. So you're kind of when you're in codependent relationships, you're kind of dependent upon others. You're not dependent upon yourself. And so when we talk about codependence in relationships is really the highlighted word. That's the operative word here, because I feel like for our people, it's about relationships. That's what led us to the church, right? Is to be in relationship with the church, the community, with God, with our faith. And I think that's what is helpful. And I think also just being able to be educated on the topic of mental health and kind of moving away from the stereotypes, the misinformation, and just being educated about what it is versus making assumptions. And I think even just with what you were saying, Hugh, with action and taking action, I came up with something, and maybe we could just kind of spend the rest of the episode talking about this, because I wanted to share with you all some of the things I was coming up with in terms of how I approach healing from a relational context as a African American clinician. And I follow the material of Native American or Indigenous African American researchers who have worked to try to understand our experiences and our traumas and intended forms of trauma, such as religious trauma, and how healing might operate under a very culturally specific context. And how we have experienced all these things. When you think about historical trauma, it's a soul wound that we have inherited from generation to generation to generation. And it's so deep. It's deep at the core of our being because of what our ancestors have experienced, our families have experienced over time. We've experienced collective dehumanization over time. And that has been compounded by the effects of historical and religious trauma. and the way that racism has compromised the way we view ourselves, the way we take care of ourselves, it has influenced the way we believe, we think, we know, how we have mental health challenges, whether it be anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, low self-worth. And so when we think about approaches, healing approaches and interventions, I think that the work of the research is pointing us to developing culturally relevant approaches that draw us back to ancient values, traditional values, from the past that we've lost over time, in order to restore a healthy relationship with ourselves as we develop a healthy relationship with members of the social body, right? And when I'm referring to the social body, I mean the natural world. When we think about nature, when we think about every organism, every living species within it, reconnecting back to that, human and non-human, plants, animals, ancestors, to restore our relationship with a sense of reciprocity and stewardship. There is restored feeling and cultural vibrancy. So our healing as Black folks is not going to come in the lens of Western psychology. It's not. We don't operate through the lens of cognitive methods. That's not how we, like, through thinking our way through our, no. That's not our design. We're not designed that way. It must be facilitated in and through not only relationship with other people, but a relationship with ourselves and our own wounding. And for some of us, that's going to be hard. For some of us, it's probably going to feel impossible. But it's a kind of healing that is making this invitation into feeling our feelings, feeling what we have experienced. When we talked about that control earlier, if we remove the cover, if we remove those things, to feel it, to be an empathetic witness, not to criticize or judge ourselves for being wounded by historical trauma, religious trauma, but being able to connect to our humanness and to acknowledge our pain. Because our healing it will come by connecting to our body. Not our thoughts, but our body. Okay? So I say all of these things to say, when you think about relationships, Nikki mentioned it, because my approach is very much of attachment. We're repeating dysfunctional relational patterns from our past. Okay. So you may be noticing yourself repeating specific emotional patterns, specific behaviors of relationships that you have been in. Yeah. Such as people pleasing, fawning, being strong. Where'd you learn that from? Being competitive. Where'd you pick that up at? Having a tendency to push and pull, where you pick that up at? Idealizing other people before actually seeing them as they are, seeing what they could be, seeing them as God, but then experiencing disappointment later. These are all dysfunctional relational patterns from our past. You may have inherited life scripts, said to yourself, I'm unlovable, I'm unwanted. God doesn't care for me. God wants me to go to hell. I'm going to hell. I'm not praying enough. These are all life scripts that is affecting how we interact with ourselves and how we interact with other people. There's a term that's called this tendency to do this dysfunctional relational pattern is called repetition of compulsion. Okay. So what's happening here is that there is this inner compulsion to, when we kind of overemphasize and over rely on spiritual thing, we bypass logic and reason and rationale. We don't this is why we can't do Western psychology, because it's just
Mm-hmm.
this thing that we do because of historical trauma, because of religious trauma, is this compulsion inwardly to repeatedly expose ourselves to the conditions that remind us of the original hurt from our past.
Yep.
Okay. So it's almost like you get these reminders, these trauma reminders of like, you know, what happened to us in the church? What happened to us in our families? What are the reminders? How did our parents treat us? You know? And so so as we were led to the church, as we were led to these environments, we were seeking out what was familiar to us, because we're repeating the same patterns over and over and over again, because we've internalized these ideas of how we deserve to be treated, our humanity, right? So at the core of this repetition that we experience is our deepest desire to thrive. Because we want to repeat the same beginning, but have a better ending to it. So when a person recognizes that their wound was carried or emotional burden was carried, they can name it. They can say, I experienced religious trauma. I experienced historical trauma. I experienced this. And then they can then turn and disclose this wound, this attachment wound, this relational wound to somebody else, like we're doing on this podcast, like we did when we met each other, like we did when we connected to our therapist or our coach or our healing practitioner or whoever. We were able to name the burden, the wound, and speak about it to another person. Because then in that encounter, we have established safety. We've established a space where we can be ourselves. We can share our experiences. We can share our struggles. We can share all of the things that we are. We can even share our strength, and we could talk our talk like, oh, I ain't got no problems. I ain't got no issues. You can come into that relationship. You can bring all of your strengths, but you can also bring your weaknesses and limitations. Because in that encounter, in that relating with another, a professional, a religious leader, a spiritual leader who is grounded in reality, you get to internalize a new experience about who you are and how others will see you. That's what you get to do in that encounter. And that process requires a level of commitment on both parts. And that is not a simple or easy thing to do. But that is where we find the light. And I know you might be listening to this and say, I've been hurt and betrayed. Yeah. To actually open up yourself and feel raw again, to enter into an encounter with someone else, that is what frightens you. But you learn how to cope over time with repeated disclosures, with repeated coming back. You learn how to cope with that over the course of your life, where you begin to learn how to develop a new relationship with yourself, like I said earlier in the show, a you that you've never met before. You begin to become comfortable with being introspective. You become comfortable with being self-aware. You become more comfortable with learning how to contextualize all of the incurred losses over time with your identity, with the culture, with your abuse, with your trauma. And you're getting information to support what has happened to you. And in that you find relief. That's a solution. That's a solution that will give you firsthand experience with the power of your story and telling your story that will disrupt and challenge all the distortions that you've been told, all of the lies that you have been told, all of the behavioral patterns that have been imprinted upon you that are residual of past hurt and experience. When you begin to clarify it, understand and understand and overstand all the structures that led you to stigmatize yourself and your own emotional health, it can help you to make sense of and make meaning out of your life. You can find peace and stability and solace in your own self on your own terms. It will make a way for you. It will open up a door where you can begin to find new types of relationships with people that will validate who you are and that will allow you to access that freedom and liberation. So that's the relationship work. And you don't do that in isolation. You do that within community, which is why it's important to look at mental health from a holistic approach, to include all these interconnected perspectives, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, the mental, the physiological parts of the self. Seeking out support from mental health professionals, religious leaders, support groups, community organizations that can address all of your needs. And collaborating in community, knowing that you're not alone in navigating your trauma. Because the system has been designed for you to operate in isolation and on your own, and corner you and back you into a corner and say, you're going to deal with this by yourself. No, that's a lie. That's a lie. We are a collectivistic culture. We are a community. Right. We are a community that is in our blood. That's in our DNA. When we come together, we come together in group. We come together as a whole, not as just one.
Yes.
That's why we have to, that's why I think a lot of us are struggling with the mental health system as it is because it was never designed for us. It wasn't designed for us. We need collaboration. We need holism. We need systems around us to support us, to undergird us, to lift us up. That is the approach of looking at it from a cultural context, you know? So that's what I would propose. I don't know how other people might feel about that, but I think that's what we need. Because that's why we're doing this podcast. We're building community. We're building, because that's what we need. We do better in community with each other versus in isolation. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
We don't got to do bad by ourselves no more. We can do bad together.
No. Why should we? We've been through too much. Been through too much. So, anyone else have any other thoughts before we end this episode, or how y'all feeling?
I think I do.
Okay, go for it, Nikki.
I hope it doesn't cut off from that beautiful ending, but I'm sitting here and I'm like, I feel like I need to say this before the episode goes off and just kind of share with you all personally what I am walking through right now. And, you know, there are levels, like we said earlier, to, you know, coming out of the stigma. And Hugh and Jonathon are my brothers, and I've been able to share with them some things I've been going through. But, you know, some of the, you know, the issues that we talked about, the illnesses, has hit my front door in a major way over the past, I would say, 3 or 4 months, maybe more. And, you know, I didn't see it coming. Here I am as a coach, and I'm gonna be totally honest. Here I am as a coach, and, you know, certain things I know there is a difference, a major difference between a coach and a licensed mental health professional like Jonathon. You know, we don't treat as far as diagnose. We don't diagnose. We support. We encourage. We walk you through, and I understand my scope. And so there are still things I'm learning. There's still things I am growing in. And when a loved one dealing with mental health illnesses, when it became apparent a few months ago, I reached out to my brothers and I shared, and I'm just going to be honest with you all because we all are dealing with these stigmas. Things came up
Mhm.
for me that I didn't even know was still there. And I was having a conversation with Jonathan, and I shared what was going on with this loved one. And he said, Nikki, this is not verbatim, but basically, Nikki, have you considered a higher form of care for this individual? And
Mhm.
I said, well, he's been in therapy and, da 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 da. And he said, okay, based on off of some of the things you're sharing, he's not my client, so I can't fully go there. But it seems like you would need a higher form of of care, which
Mhm.
basically would include some psychiatric services.
Yeah.
Now, when even that terminology came up, and again, I work around this, but that is not my full expertise or my lane, like I just explained. And when it hit my front door, I'm just like, oh my gosh, really? And I started to research and I started to understand, and I was like, yeah, he was right. And my family and loved ones started to embark on that process. And I remember having a discussion with my family about it, and the first thing that came out of their mouth is, "I know he's dealing with these issues, but we're not gonna give any medication. That's a no,
Mhm.
that's off the table." And y'all know what? I kinda was thinking the same thing at first. I was
Mm.
like, "Yeah, yeah, I hear you, let's just see what we can deal with. Let's see what they say. Yeah, 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 no medication." Then I started to learn a little bit more. But then, like, we've been talking about this past 4 or 5 months about seeing, but it was hitting me in the face. And Jonathan was so tender and compassionate with me. He didn't make me feel shame or anything. I actually called it out. Was like, whoa, what is this coming up? What is this resistance to it? Okay, why can I just quickly say, we're not going to give that to that loved one. We're not going to even think of that as being a resource. Like, where is that coming from? Then I
Mhm.
started to do some work and pulling back the curtain, and I said, oh, it takes time to start allowing some of these teachings and indoctrinations and influences to how we think and believe. And I had to really look within myself, not just educating myself on what was the actual diagnosis for this loved one, but I had to look at why I was so resistant initially, especially when I know about this stuff. So,
Yeah.
people that are in the mental health space, people that are serving those who are dealing with trauma and stuff like that, we are not exempt from these biases and, these misconceptions we have around mental health illnesses.
Mhm.
And we did not touch on this, but I'm just going to throw this out there and just say to be continued. A
Yeah.
lot of what was coming, you know where I'm going, a lot of what was coming up for me, y'all. Okay. And this is Black Church Style 101, was a lot of stuff that I learned in deliverance ministry and my
Mhm.
church history experience. I'm not going to go full throttle because we're going to have an episode in and of itself in the future about deliverance ministry. But I had to
Mhm.
start confronting that and said, oh my goodness, I didn't know some of these beliefs were still there. And I
Right.
had to start uncovering, and I'm still doing that to this day, y'all. But let me bring it home and to say
Mhm.
this personal experience with this loved one that is very close, I didn't have a choice. It has completely started to dismantle a lot of the stigmas that I had about even when there's a need to take medication. We're so easy, especially in the Black church, and it don't even have to be for mental health issues. It could just be for a common cold. And like Jonathan said, I get it. There's a lot of distrust there between us historically as a people and the medical community. I get it. But
Mhm.
when it comes to this, it is
Mhm.
very imperative with this particular disorder that they have that they take medication. And I had to
Yeah.
learn, I had to unlearn and be open to learning again. And I am seeing some benefits because this individual started to take medication. So some of you out there may be like, Nikki, I know what you're talking about. I was hoping y'all mentioned that in the episode. This may be for you, for me to just share and be candid and be vulnerable before you all and say, let's learn about these resistance to things that help us. Because for some of us, some of the disorders we have, it's an issue within the brain development. It's an issue on how our brain is wired and what's going on in there. And medication is not all bad. Again, 2020, if I didn't take the meds that I took, if I didn't get the surgery I got, I wouldn't even be alive to tell y'all this story. So
Mhm.
there are times when the balance comes in, and we have to really educate ourselves and look at what we're dealing with for the sake of our own selves, for the sake of our loved ones, and actually challenge these belief systems that we have that are not helping us in the long run. So,
Yeah.
for some of you out there, again, you've been, flirting with, the medication option. You might have gone to get some mental health help and everything like that. I'm not telling you what to do. This is not what this podcast exists for. But I just want to encourage you to see and to challenge yourself. Go back over this episode, take some notes,
Mhm.
and actually ask yourself, how did this belief system get here? And sometimes you may still hold the belief. Now, I'm not saying every belief that we look at is meant to let go of. Some of them we want to hold, but a lot of them, especially if
Mhm.
they originated into some faulty teachings within the church, you might want to revisit and consider releasing, especially when it comes to your health and wealth of you and your loved ones. So I know that's not a great ending, but I really felt like I needed to share the story before we wrapped up. So that's what I got.
I appreciate you for sharing that. I did have a closing remark before we close out. But Hugh, did you have any thoughts before we end the episode?
Um, I just want to leave. I just want to say, if we can just say, I need help. Like, if we can just say that a couple times every morning, and if we can drill that in our heads and be comfortable with it and not um, give up the damn cape sometime, I just want to. I just want to say it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to rely on help. It's okay to have needs. It's okay, you know. You don't need to have this wall of this fortress that is hiding your true self from the world, hiding your true self from yourself. You don't need to be reliant on that. You can seek help. It's okay to seek help. It's okay to say, I need help. It's okay to get your feet wet. It's okay to go in full throttle. It's okay to pull out. It's okay to do what you need to do. But it's okay to say, I need help. And I just want us to be able to just even say it. That's all. That's all I want to leave this episode with.
Yes, I appreciate that. I do want to make sure that I say this before we stop this episode. That it's kind of going on both of your shares a little bit, in that saying that our podcast is not designed to bash the Black church, or it's not even designed to bash or come against any type of African American Black religious traditions. That is not. I think that would be a really unproductive use of our time. And I think this is really, really about, because I know that when we are talking about issues related to the Black church, there's often this sense of like, why are y'all talking about this? This is the case with all communities. I don't know why y'all are centering the Black church. I want to emphasize, just as a mental health professional, that I have seen the Black church playing a central role in the social, cultural, and spiritual lives of African American and Black people throughout time, still being the hub of worship spaces, community gatherings, empowerment, resilient. Black churches have provided support for people, social services, platforms for social justice issues, but we have to be realistic, okay? Just like any other religious tradition, Black churches also have its challenges. It has its challenges in terms of perpetuating mental health stigma. It has its challenges and potential for religious trauma and abuse, spiritual trauma. It has its challenges in the area of limited education, awareness, and knowledge for resources on addressing mental health concerns. This is a serious issue, particularly right now in this pandemic. The Black African American mental health, it is the likelihood of disorders is sky high. It is serious, and we must take this issue seriously. I don't disrespect any type of way of spiritual expression. It is not even about that. It's about making sure that people are getting their needs met at the end of the day, and emphasizing the importance of doing so instead of holding people hostage to their own faith and spirituality. That is not helpful. It is harmful. And the mental health community and the religious communities need to be working together to offer balance for the people that gives respect to both the spiritual and the natural and the psychological of a person, of a human being, rather than separating them from their humanity. And I hope that we accomplish the goal of reducing the stigma by bringing light and attention to this issue, the serious issue that is affecting so many people in our community. And it's time out for us to just stop the game playing and stop and start taking some action. Education, awareness, action. That's what we need. So I appreciate you, Hugh and Nikki, for sharing your stories and your strength and your resources and your knowledge and your wisdom. I hope that this was helpful for our community that we are developing. We still have our resources. We still have our Surviving the Black Church Facebook group. We still have our Instagram accounts. We have resources. Please reach out to us. We are here, and we will be continuing this work of providing this information and this knowledge base for you all to bring awareness to more mental health, to more religious trauma, to more issues that are affecting our community. And we look forward to continuing on with the work. And so with that, thank you so much. And we will see you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to Surviving the Black Church podcast with your hosts, Jonathon, Nikki, and Hugh. If you enjoyed today's podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode. Until next time, take care.